Former CNN and Time magazine foreign correspondent Michael Ware has toured the region extensively, often embedded with US troops. He says the US administration is much more open with the public and it's unnecessary for the government to withhold information. Michael Ware joins me now from our Brisbane newsroom. Michael Ware, good morning. What's your issue with those press conferences this morning?
Well, Joe, for me, obviously the death of any digger is something of note, and that would be the same for anyone in the defence family or the defence community. But for me, having come home from almost a decade of these wars, and I know Rosgun's province specifically because I lived in Kandahar for almost a year, and what strikes me now watching the developments back here in Australia is the similarities in the way that the government and the Defence Force handle information and informing the Australian public about the broader nature of the operations and our presence in these conflicts. Indeed, some of the comments I heard from the Prime Minister and Defence Minister this morning reminded me of some of the mistruths and obfuscations we used to hear from the Bush administration when they were talking about Iraq.
Well, what more did you want them to say?
Well, in regard to the particular death of this one soldier in this operation, there's not much more they really can say, to be honest, at this moment. But what it does is it highlights the broader veil of secrecy, the vacuum of silence, in which, by and large, the Australian forces over in Afghanistan are fighting, bleeding, sweating and dying in silence. And the knock-on effect of that, of course, is when they come home as veterans, they're going to suffer in silence as the community is pretty much unaware of what's been going on to them.
So you say there's not more they can say about this specific incident now, but what more did you want them to say at this press conference that they did not say?
Well, perhaps not at this press conference, but indeed, for example, while operations are underway, it's sound policy not to disclose great detail. However, at this point, would we imagine that the Taliban don't know where we are? Would we imagine that the Taliban don't know the effect that they have had? I mean, the Taliban are a very savvy foe. And it was brought into stark contrast for me, particularly by something the Defence Minister said, where he claimed that discussions or moves towards a political solution to the conflict in Afghanistan was a clear indication somehow that the Taliban had come to the realisation they couldn't win militarily, which is simply ludicrous.
Why is it ludicrous to say that?
Well, because for many reasons. One is the Taliban, from the very outset, have been conducting a classic insurgency in which the obligation is not upon them militarily to win, simply not to lose. But beyond that, the Taliban have made it very clear over the years of this conflict that they're waging this war to gain a seat at the Afghan table of power. And indeed, in the middle of 2006, the Pakistani intelligence agency, the two-star general, who's their public spokesman, went on camera and said, we are in direct communication with the Taliban and the Haqqani network and the Gulbuddin Hekmatyar network, and we can bring them to the negotiating table. Because that's been the point of the whole affair from the very beginning. So it really does strike me as odd that the Defence Minister would choose a morning like this to make such an odd statement.
What is it about what the officials are not saying which undermines this in terms of the Australian population and the soldiers over there now?
Well, put it this way, I can think of a myriad of examples, Joe. One is that in the decade of these deployments, it was only earlier this year that we had the first ever National Defence Community Forum to get all the stakeholders from Veterans Affairs on down to sit together and talk about where are the boys falling through the cracks in the system. And I can assure you that they are.
Is this when they get back to Australia?
This is when they get back to Australia, because this is a direct consequence of the political convenience that it is to have the Australian public think of the soldiers out of sight and out of mind while the deployments are going on. Look, for example, at the media embed policy between the Australian deployments and the American or British or even the Estonian deployments or the NATO deployments that I've been on countless times. I mean, really, and this is successive Australian administrations. It's been politically convenient to have them fighting in a vacuum, and the public not really thinking about it day to day because it's politically, it's not very palatable. Well, I know for a fact that the diggers themselves deserve far more than that.
How are they falling through the cracks back here in Australia?
Well, it's in a number of ways. As we know that when, for example, 6 RAR returned from their rather difficult deployment last year, we've seen public reports of a number of suicides. We know that there's significant issues with the rising suicide rates among veterans in America and possibly even here. We see that programs for the treatment of PTSD, for example, among Australian soldiers are currently under review, quality assurance review, by Veterans Affairs. There's significant questions about our military culture with regard to these things, and certainly with regard to the community's awareness, because it's just a simple acknowledgement of their service and the burdens that come with that has proved so effective in helping soldiers come home in America.
So practically, how would you like to see that media management and that public information management change now?
Well, we could drop the wall of silence. What is there to fear? Certainly the diggers in the field have nothing to fear. They've got nothing but pride for what they're doing. So why don't we see an active media embed policy instead of this farcical drip feed of sending journalists over every few months in a very controlled and contained way? By the same measure, where's the media presence in Afghanistan? We have Australian forces at war, and it's not like they just suddenly arrived over there, and it's only the ABC holding down the fort with a single correspondent. I mean, I find this appalling. As a community, to come home after a decade at these wars, seeing the way other nations handle the information surrounding their military activities, and seeing the way that translates for soldiers in their community once they come back home.
Just finally, Michael Ware, are you heading back over there anytime soon?
Well, that's a great question, Joe. Indeed, that's why I'm growing the beard at the moment, because I'm weighing up the relative merits. I dare say I wouldn't be a popular application from Defence Media Ops, but there's other ways of covering Rosegun Province. Trust me, I know that place like the back of my hand.
Okay, Michael Ware in Brisbane, thank you.
Thanks, mate.